Hi, everyone. Welcome to this month's Wireside Chat. I'm Paul Whitcover, the Associate Dean of the Online MFA, and I'm joined by my colleague, Melissa Hart, who is always my wing person, and Peter Stenson, our guest tonight, an instructor in the MFA. Some of you may know. Um, Peter, I'm going to give a little brief introduction. Peter is the author of the novels Fiend, 37, The Sexual Lives of Suburbanites, and We Adults. There's a comma in there, and I'm going to ask about that. He has stories and essays published in The Sun, Bellevue Literary Review, the Greensboro Review, Confrontation, Harper Pallet, and Post Road, among others. He teaches writing at SNHU and Colorado State University. And we have a lot of topics to talk about, but first I want to ask you about that comma. As a sometime copy editor, I'm very interested in the placement of commas. So tell me what you're going for with that title and why you decided to put the comma in there.
Yes, I definitely will. I don't know if it will pass the copy editor test. It is funny though. My son, who was like 8 at the time or something like that, he's like, Dad, like, how's your new book doing? Us adults, or no, us parents is what he calls it, you know. So I'm kind of going for that. Um, Honestly, I think the most straightforward answer I can give is when I was in my MFA program, Justin Torres, or I forget his exact name, he had the novel.
We the Animals.
Yes, and I was like,
Okay.
I really liked that comma, and like that was
Yeah.
it. And I love the book, so it kind of went there. If there was like a smarter response, I don't have it for like what it's doing grammatically, but I just kind of liked the sound of it. I like the pause of it. But I do run into some grammatical issues like with editors or like, hey, what's with this comma? I was like, I don't know. It just felt like it, you know, like as far as trying to connect voice with not just diction, but really focusing on the rhythm of a sentence or a paragraph or even a title, and connect that to character, how they are experiencing it and speak and talk. But yes, it was Justin Torres's novel is the real answer.
But I mean, that raises a great point because I feel like, grammar and punctuation are kind of the prerogative of the writer, right? I mean, suggestions might be made to amend or change certain choices the writer makes, but in the end, really, it's the writer's book. And as you say, it's in the service of voice, rhythm, pacing, all of these important elements. Is that something that's instinctive for you, or how do you decide where those things happen in text?
At least first draft, 100% instinctive. You know, like I try my absolute hardest to shut down my brain and get outside of anything I know. You know, as I was mentioning before we started, I teach composition, 101 and stuff. I like try to turn that off and just get into that character's voice, even if it's a third person voice, a narrator, get into that. And the closer the psychic distance, the more I want to illustrate the character's thoughts and the way he or she or they experience the world. Second and third drafts, and then when it finally goes out and an agent or editor or a beta reader, then it's more intentional. And I'll just get a lot of like circles because I'm old school, and I'll send an actual manuscript to someone, and they're like, just circle it, question mark, like, why do you have a comma here, or why don't you? And then I have to go think, kind of weigh the pros and cons, like what's gained versus this versus what's lost. And I don't know. One thing I have noticed is for a while, when Grammarly was just coming out and free, I downloaded that because I was like, oh, that will help, emails, just whatever. And somehow it went onto my Microsoft Word, and it was always suggesting commas where I didn't want them for, maybe a run on or something like that. And I finally had to uninstall it and just, I don't want those thoughts, those corrections in a draft, maybe on down the line, but
Right.
yeah.
They're getting in the way.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about your path to where you are today as a writer?
Yeah. As far as, short story long, long story short, my mom always tells a story. And I don't quite remember it like this, but I guess now that I'm a parent, you kind of have creative license on some of your children's stories. I was like in fifth grade and we did like a poetry unit, and I remember I was just doing these really emo type of poems and just like really feeling emotions that I never knew I necessarily had, or, it's certainly not able to verbalize them in any intelligent fashion, tell people what's wrong or whatever. But I could in these poems, and like the teacher was really excited about it, and I was like the first time in school I ever had any sort of real positive feedback other than good job champ or something like that. uh, and I told my mom, I was like, I just know, this is what she says. I don't remember it. I guess I said, I just know I'm going to be a famous writer. And she's like, how? And I was like, because I have such a tortured soul. Luckily, I outgrew out of some of that kind of emo, adolescent type feeling. But it was kind of from then that I just fell in love with telling stories, with writing, with trying to make sense of the world and trying to give people escape, give myself escape, trying to create those small little beautiful moments that, I think 90% of us probably skip by on a daily basis, or I know I do a lot of the time. So that's kind of the backstory. I think in undergrad, I bounced around a couple majors in the humanities, like I was psychology, trying to figure out what's wrong with everyone and uh, all of that. Philosophy, of course, I had a semester where I was going to solve the world's problems, but quickly landed on English and again fell in love. And it was just, I wasn't that well read at that point. Up until then, it consisted of like every Stephen King book and Fitzgerald because he went to the same high school until he got kicked out as I did. So that was kind of what I read. And a couple of my mom's romance with Fabio on the cover, which we were talking about before, because, he's got it. I wanted to see what all the fuss was about. But yeah, just fell in love with it. People were doing things I had no idea, and I had hundreds and hundreds of years to catch up on, and just started writing and reading like full time, throughout that period. Decided to pursue my MFA in fiction. Went out to Colorado State. I was from Minnesota, moved out there, and I always tell this story in pretty much all my classes, at least the ones that have a workshop. Like, my first workshop experience was like the most brutal, horrible workshop, and everyone who was there, will back me up on this. It just was 90 minutes of me sitting there, after turning in a story of people just like the meanest comments. Like my advisor, my thesis advisor was there. It was, the first week of school. He's like, this is the worst story a student has ever turned in.
Oh my God.
People were like, have you ever read a short story? Like, what are you doing in this program? And being the well-adjusted, 28-year-old or whatever I was at the time, I made it to the bathroom before I completely broke down sobbing. I did that.
Gosh. I feel terrible for you. And I feel like I must interject that, anyone that's listening to this that has yet to take a workshop in the MFA or is contemplating attending the MFA and is worried about like what are the workshops like, we do not make you cry. That's
No.
not the purpose of our workshops. We're going to lift you up and gently guide you to becoming the best writer you can be. That's what we're about. But my first workshop experience was like yours. I mean, it was a nightmare. I tell people about it and they can't believe that it happened. But back in the day, that was not a rare experience. There was this kind of weird idea that you had to break the student down and rebuild them or something.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Or try to discourage them from writing because only the real writers
right.
somehow survive.
Right. And it just makes me so mad. And yes, I should have led with that because I do, as well as, every professor and colleague everywhere I've ever been, do everything in my power not to replicate that experience of you just be quiet and we tell you what's wrong, like to actually see what the person is trying to create and, try to help and shape your comments to help that, that person achieve their goal, which like I came up, like I said, like on Stephen King, like that was my jam and still is a lot. Like I didn't write quiet little short story literary fiction, 3-page things like my MFA program wanted. And that's why I think like this isn't an infomercial for Southern New Hampshire, but like it's just a breath of fresh air. Like you can write what you want to write. And we celebrate the different types, the different genres. And my God, it like makes me want to cry when I think about like how I was forced into something I didn't necessarily want to do and made to feel like my writing was junky because it didn't fit that versus what, we have going on here. So,
how did you get past that? How did you decide that you were going to persevere in the face of that?
So I went home, and again, we had just moved like across the country and, my wife, we've been married maybe a year, maybe not even, Italian gal. And she's like, okay, I'll listen for 5 minutes and you got to get your ass together and buck up. Like you either want to do this or you don't. Like people are not going to understand. They're going to be mean. Screw them, and so that was like a big kind of moment like, yeah, okay, maybe everything I write people aren't going to like. I do have a different sensibility than certain people. I have a different background, different experiences, different things I'm interested in. And so it was kind of that tough love support was a huge part of me getting through it. And I think the next story that I wrote, I just wrote kind of like what I knew. Like I had a somewhat troubled teenage year with addictions and, stuff like that. And it was a pretty dark, gritty story. And it was authentic to me at that time or, like what I had been through and it felt real. And I think my professor saw something in there like, oh, okay, here's, I don't know if I passed this little test or whatever, but like something happened where I felt like, hey, this is my truth and I deserve to be here. And I think it wasn't quite slammed as much. And from there, I was kind of off to the races. I didn't want to feel like I did in that workshop ever again. And I worked really, really hard. And then I got a lucky break. That was the program I went to was a 3-year program, and maybe I went to the AWP conference, the Association of Writing Programs.
Yeah, I always forget what that is.
Yeah, because I was working at the literary magazine, so they like paid for half of our plane ticket or something. So I went out and I was manning the booth at the literary magazine, and there's for those of you who are unfamiliar, it's 10,000 or plus creative writers, some in school, some, out of school with panels and book fairs and all of that. And I was just sitting there and, like someone came up and he said he was an agent. And I had nothing worth showing anyone, at this point. And I said some cheesy line, which I don't know because I'm like the most insecure, nervous person ever. And I was like, you want to get rich or something like so cheesy like that. I would not suggest saying that. And he laughed. He's like, okay, when you have something, here's my card. Um, and, I sent over a first chapter of something I was working on, and he really liked it. It was like, yeah, I'd love to take a look when it's done. And I thought that meant like within the month. So I like wrote the whole novel in like 2 months or something like that, sent it over, and he's like, holy cow, let's try. And that was my debut novel, and it came out, I guess, right as I was ending the program. You know, with Random House, like it was a big deal. I didn't know how lucky I was. I thought it was all going to be that easy, and I was like, well, I'm a big time. Obviously it did not go that way. I struck, got
That
lucky.
was Fiend, right?
That was Fiend, yeah. And then, from there, I've just been writing and working odd jobs until I started teaching about 10 years ago at various colleges, and joined on with SNHU, and then at CSU in person, and trying to write at least a half hour, 45 minutes every morning. It gets exponentially more difficult the more bills you have and more children you have, which I've come to realize. But so yeah, sorry, that was a very long answer, but
No, that was great, and it actually kind of introduced some of the other topics that we wanted to talk about a little bit tonight. And I'm going to just going to actually, before I get into that, I'd like to remind or tell people who are here in the audience, please type any questions that you might have for Peter into the chat, and Melissa or I will upraise them to him for his answer. So let's talk a little bit about writing and children.
yes, I see some people on the.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of people that are having this experience,
Mhm.
and I have a stepdaughter who's now in her 20s, no longer lives with us, so it's a little bit different for me. But I was there, I experienced it. So, what? I mean, like, what is your approach to like being a good parent
Mhm.
and yet still maintaining the time and the space in which to do good writing?
Mhm. Tough question, and one I think I have mastered, and then one little cold or something happens and everything gets thrown out the window. A couple things. The first thing I did want to say is, well, I guess the first thing I should say, I love my kids more than anything. Like, I didn't know it was possible, and I know we all kind of feel like this. I've always been rather self-consumed and been like, I don't know, kids, but like it changed my everything. And there's nothing more I want to be doing than providing them, the upbringing that part of it that I had or that I wanted, or, just the best, and spending time with them. That's point A. Point B, as I had mentioned about my wife, like she learned, we've been together since we were like 19, and she knew like early on. So, child is cat lady.
Yeah,
that term's been in the news lately. She learned early on, my wife did, that like I am a much happier, more content, more positive person if I can get a little writing done in the morning, like just to clear my head, even if it's just a half hour, get a cup of coffee, get a paragraph or two done. So she has always urged me and given me that support of knowing that, like, daddy's going to be gone for an hour in the morning or whatever, even on the weekends. And the third thing I would say is it just became like an absolute habit, like if my kids were waking up I mean, when they were really little, it was tough, like infants and stuff. But like if hey, they're gonna wake up at 6 a.m., I'm gonna get up at 4:30 and go sit in the car with a cup of coffee and just write in the car for an hour. And I've been doing that for their whole lives. And before that, when I was working retail jobs and all of that, would do it then too. For some reason, the car is like my safe space. I don't have it on. I'm not trying to, hurt anything. But I just am.
Isn't there a Gary Newman song about that?
What's that?
Isn't there a Gary Newman song about cars being your safe space?
I don't know, but
that's a great song.
And I just like my own little world, and I sit there and get an hour of writing in. But yeah, it's hard, But from a very selfish, like writerly standpoint, I wouldn't trade it children for anything. Like, it gives me so many different emotions and experiences and everything that I feel like I wouldn't have had been able to write about or know about or experience. And that's from a very small, selfish, like writerly standpoint versus everything else.
Melissa, you did a panel on parenting and writing at the last AWP.
I did.
Oh, cool.
What has your experience been?
Oh, wow. Exactly what you were saying, Peter. I mean, I had to train myself so quickly to write creatively as soon as I dropped my daughter off at dance class or horse camp or whatever. Your car becomes your office, and you got to stock it with great snacks and coffee, drinks, and socks. And I mean, there's just so many times I've written in the parking garage when it's either 102 or it's 32, and you just have to do it.
Right.
Yeah, you just have to train yourself. Open up the laptop and you just start writing. It's not going to be, brilliant, the rough draft, but you got to get that rough draft down.
Right.
Yeah. I actually in the chat said that if anybody wants the handout from last year's AWP presentation to email me and I'll send you the handout. It was a compilation of all the panelists' advice, resources. And so I'm so happy to share that.
Yes, that's awesome. I would love that. Yes.
Here's a comment from Mary Jo Warner. She says, "I love this. This is my life. I found a tray on Amazon that hooks to my steering wheel." I'll use that while you're driving. That's a great idea. That is
genius. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Let me see if I can pull a question out of the chat. Here's a question.
That one. Oh, you got one, Paul?
Oh, I'm sorry, Melissa. Do you have something?
Oh, I had something way up in the chat. Somebody wanted to know the advantages to our MFA program.
That's the one that I was just going to grab.
Yeah. Aside from our warm and supportive critiques.
Yes. So I'm going to throw that to both of you.
Go ahead, Peter.
Two main things, and the list could go on. One I kind of talked about with a lot of MFA programs are geared toward, like a short story or a literary fiction or contemporary fiction, but even more kind of literary, meaning that, hey, if I want to write, about dragons or a thriller, a political espionage, or a romance, a lot, unfortunately, of traditional kind of MFA programs or online ones will kind of be like, no, we don't really do that here. We want to like teach you this very specific version of what we consider to be quote unquote good fiction. And I think that's just hogwash. Okay. And I think it's really damaging to students, to aspiring authors, to creativity, to all of that. And I know Jennifer does love dragons, having had her in class. At Southern New Hampshire, we have 4 different genres, right? So it's kind of speculative fiction, contemporary fiction, romance.
YA.
Which one?
YA.
Oh,
YA.
yeah, duh, the best one. And young adult. And you will learn about all of them, you will write all of them, but you get to really hone in and focus on what makes you excited, what you want to write about. And the further you get, you will start to narrow down, from what I understand, and be working with thesis advisors and classes specifically for that genre, to try to write the best possible story that you want to write in the genre that you want to write about, or write in. And that is just pretty darn rare. And I think that is really, really cool. That to me is my favorite part about the program. And the second thing, this ties into, kids or jobs or whatever, like, and yeah, there are different online ones or low residency. The fact that you can do it from your computer is the best thing ever. Like you don't have to, like I did, move across the country and try to scrabble together loans and all of that, and living, and like can't really work because your classes are all in person and days. Like it's just impossible. I don't know how anyone can do it. So that was, kind of my second point. Melissa?
Oh, yes. So a lot of my students over the past years have had different physical disabilities, or they're dealing with mental illness, or in some cases they're elderly, and in a lot of cases they are the sandwich generation, taking care of both their children and their older parents.
Yeah.
And I love that our program makes it so easy for them to focus on their dreams of becoming a published author. I also love that we have students from all over the world, and just the diversity of the student population is just so remarkable. So those are kind of my two favorite things: how inclusive and accessible it is, and the fact that we're worldwide. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that
Somebody.
makes me feel good to hear.
Yeah.
And I guess the one thing I would add is that, when you come out of this program, you'll have a novel under your belt.
Yeah.
And that's not something that many other programs can say. And we give you we tee it up for you, right? And when you leave 702, you have an opportunity to meet with an agent and pitch your novel. We have had students who have been signed by agents as a result of that. I think that's exciting. I didn't have anything like that when I was in my writing program.
Yeah.
So I'm going to dip into the chat because we have a craft question, and I think it'd be a good thing to talk a little bit about craft.
Yeah.
I'm currently writing my first piece with multiple POVs, and I'm struggling to keep their voices distinct and consistent. According to the blurb for tonight, you're an expert on POVs. Please share your advice. Not to put you on the spot.
Expert is, let's put it out there. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because honestly, like in my writing time today, I'm doing something and I have like 40 different characters. It's kind of like a podcast essentially. And I'm like, dude, half these people sound identical, so I'm going through that same thing. So definitely not an expert. I think for me, kind of character and point of view are linked at a level that it's pretty darn hard to pull them apart. So when I'm talking about character, I'm talking about like, hey, if you met this person, like it's who they are, what they're into, what they've been through, how they see the world, what their dreams are, what their fears are, but all of that kind of character, generative type of material. And point of view is kind of the way that we are presenting that as authors. So, first person would be I pronoun, second you, third he, she, and then, there are different variations with that. I think one thing that I try really hard to do is find the way in which my character would want his or her their story told. All right. So in my most recent novel, We Adults, with the questionable comma, as we know, um, there are 4 distinct sections, and each one is a different point of view, and there's different kind of epistolary elements. Like one's a standalone screenplay, with formatting, a full 120 pages. Um, one is college admission essay questions. So I was messing around with it. But it goes back to how that person would tell this story. All right. So if I have a 17-year-old, as one of my characters, a guy just trying to kind of figure things out, finishing high school, starting college, I think the way that that character would want his story told and how he would write it would be in that screenplay, because he doesn't give a darn about books or fiction or English class in this particular novel. But he'd be like, yeah, I'm going to write this as a screenplay because he's taken a screenwriting course in college. So I was like, hey, I'm going to, do that for my point of view there. So that's a long way of saying just think about the character, how they would want it told. And I think that could be a good starting place. I tend to gravitate towards first person. It's just, how I, how it's been so far. But there are times when I've tried to write something in first person and it just felt wrong. There's experimentation in it, so maybe I'll go, hey, I could do a limited or kind of a close third person where I have a narrator describing everything. And then when I do that, I find maybe I have a little bit more playfulness in my voice, or a little bit more authority, or my characters become more likable, because they tend not to be. So, there's ways to tinker with it. And I think if you're struggling, which we all are at times, to figure out the point of view for a character, just have a simple scene of, whatever, going into the coffee shop, even if it's a, Middle English fantasy or something, going into the local tavern and just interacting with people. Do it in first person. I see, I think, I feel, I experience. Second person is weird, but some authors do it well. But then like a third person, and you could describe things a little bit more. Or if you're really feeling ambitious, an omniscient narrator where we are pulled way back and you get access to everything. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that in your first go around, but kind of build up to it, and just see what feels most natural for you as a writer, for you, for that character. And that's a good little exercise, a paragraph or so, just to get a feel.
It's kind of like, in 514, we ask students to experiment by writing in different genres, maybe push the envelope a little bit in their personal, toolbox. And I guess it's similar with point of view. You want to try different points of view so that you can become more or less adept at each of them, because you might need to use them at different points for different stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was just seeing some of these people talking about second person, and I think it's really cool. It's not something I've tried in any sort of longer story or anything like that, or a novel, maybe some short stories. What's the author who does the How to Talk to a Hunter? Who wrote? You guys remember that? That was one of my favorite second persons. I forget, but anyway, just reading those. I think it's
Pam Houston.
Yeah, Pam Houston. So yeah, I would give that a read if you're kind of curious. It's fun, and just how much it makes the reader part of the story and implicates you as the character and stuff, I think is fun.
We've got a couple of other call outs in the chat for writers that do really well in second person. I've never read anything by Pam Houston. I should check her out. N.K. Jameson. Go ahead, Melissa.
Oh, somebody said, can you speak on switching tenses? But I can't tell if it's for or against switching tenses.
I mean, I wouldn't suggest it.
Oh, here it is. When I first started writing, I tried writing in the present tense. I hadn't realized it was something to keep track of. So I think they're talking about shifting them.
I do tend to write also in present tense for a lot of things. And again, that's just kind of my natural gravitation is first person present because my mind is a whirlwind nightmare ADHD. And that's just how, my characters tend to think. And it comes across very fresh and immediate and with some urgency. Since, the first 5 or 6 years, I've tried to switch it around and play with different things, but I don't think there's anything wrong. It may not be the standard to use present tense, but I think it's really fun and I think it's cool. And I wouldn't think twice about it necessarily at this point.
Yeah, here's somebody in the chat saying I use past tense for the main story and present tense for dream sequences. I mean, that makes sense. I feel like the important thing there is like consistency, right? Mm-hmm. So you're just not randomly switching up your tenses. There's a reason to it and a pattern to it that the reader can discern and kind of follow along with. Mm-hmm. Then it makes perfect sense to do it that way. Mm-hmm. And somebody else says, for present tense might be better suited to action.
Mm-hmm. Here's the clarification. I happen to switch tenses without realizing it, and I've been criticized for it.
Oh.
Nobody can criticize you for doing it without realizing it, but once you realize it, you got to fix it.
I know how to fix it. You have to circle every single verb on several pages and say, is this present, past, or future tense? Mm-hmm. And train yourself to write in one tense.
Mm-hmm. You do. And I mean, somebody here says an editor will help with that. And that's true up to a point, but you're not going to get to the point of having an editor if your work is not showing the discipline of having your tenses be consistent, or if they're not consistent, having them be different in a consistent way, because an agent or an editor is going to reject your manuscript because they'll assume that you haven't paid close enough attention to it in the revision process or whatever. Here's a great question. What about listening to your work out loud? Would that help you catch it?
I would think so.
Do either of you read your work aloud or play your work back to yourself to hear it that way?
I read my work out loud.
Mm-hmm. I did too, and I never even thought about it being a possibility, but I'm sure you could just push a button and it would actually read it back to you in 2024. You can definitely do that.
Yeah, you can do that. I mean, it's a little weird because obviously there's no emotional resonance to it. It's like hearing it read by a robot, but that can be useful too. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's useful for more than just catching, verb inconsistencies. It's like it's opening a curtain on your own work that you don't have a chance to normally see, because when you're looking at the words on the page, constantly drumming them into your brain, it's hard to see your work from a new perspective, and this is a way to do that.
I should try that. I read it out loud, but I've never listened to it out loud. That would be cool.
It can save your voice a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. Here's another question I'm going to pull out of the chat. And this is about the imposter syndrome. And it's asking if that is something that you have ever experienced, and just to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, that one, I won't use a cuss word, but like that one gets me. Like daily, you know, in, you know, like all through school, I wasn't like a natural, you know, I wasn't great, you know, a great student by any means. Like, I think I was doing that hooked on phonics in like fourth grade and couldn't like read even close to grade level. And it like from the get go, I equated school to like failing, and reading to failing, and writing to, I don't know what, you know, nothing until later on. And I think that imposter syndrome, like it's a weird choice to be like, hey, I'm going to be an author and an English professor, you know, going from that. But yes, every day, school, undergrad, grad school, really big. Writing, sending things out, like teaching, you know, a lot of time. Like, I'm like, who the heck am I? What could I do to help people? Or if I'm writing, like, this story's probably been told, what the heck am I going to add? But here's the thing that like has been told to me, you know, different ways. Like, I have, and by I mean all of us as aspiring writers, we each have our own idea, our own experiences, our own just worldview, and everything that will tell the story that only we can tell. You know, even if we were all given a prompt right now and, you know, have 10 minutes to write a little scene, every scene will be different. And that helps me so much. Like, my experience, my mind is valid. I will create something that will be different from other people and of worth. I just try to, you know, keep telling myself that. And sometimes, like at the beginning of a writing session, boom, I have to hit that mantra, you know, of like, I'm of value. I deserve to be sitting down in my car writing for an hour. So, yes, it is something I deal with and struggle with all the time. And I think you'd hardly be a writer if you didn't. Like, I've never met a writer who doesn't have some of that self-doubt or imposter syndrome, or anxiety or any of that, that, you know, kind of messes with your head as you're trying to do the work. Do you guys struggle with that?
Oh yeah. I mean, you know, in my writing as a teacher, as you pointed out, as the dean of the program, you know,
Mhm.
every achievement that I make is accompanied by you know, the shadow of the
Mhm.
imposter syndrome. Nominated
Mhm.
for an award. What am I doing here? Why?
Right.
You know, somebody's going to figure out that I don't really belong here.
Right.
Um, but I just kind of have basically I just try to ignore it as best I can.
Hmm.
What about you, Melissa?
Oh yeah, every day. I think that's one reason that why it's taking me so long to write this historical novel, because I persist in also writing short pieces,
Mm.
chasing that little hit of dopamine, chasing that, oh, I
Yes.
am a real writer. I just had this essay published or this article published. So
Oh.
it earns me a few more months of writing this historical novel. That's
Yes.
just
That's great.
so
Hey, whatever it
embarrassing
takes.
to admit. Oh,
But so true. You need that. You're like, oh, okay. I got my card for another 3 months.
it's
Yes.
Right.
true. It's totally true.
All
Hmm.
right, I'm going to pull another question out of the chat.
Oh, there's a
Uh,
really good one.
you have one? Why don't you pull one out of the
Oh,
chat?
it's the one about genre. So,
Yes, that's the one I was going to go to.
yeah, you've mentioned that we try out different genres in the program. Do you personally, Peter, switch genres? Every time I read a book, I want to write in that genre. Can you write in more than one, or do you need to find a niche? Yeah,
Awesome question.
it's
I
fantastic.
can say what I personally do, and then say, I'll just share my experience. Yes, I think you can write in more than one genre. Um, Personally, you know, my first novel was a, you know, speculative fiction kind of horror genre. Second novel was more of a literary, but they kind of labeled it as horror as well. Third would be kind of, I don't know, absurdist, literary, and kind of literary for the fourth. I can't stand the thought of having to write something I don't want to write at that time, and that's just me personally. If someone's like, hey, here's a 3-book deal, have at it, pal, and maybe I would change my tune, but so I read across many different genres. As I said, I didn't grow up reading like great literary fiction. I grew up reading like horror novels and my mom's romance, that's what I like. And I like to dabble, and I want to write the book that I want to write, and I think in some of the classes, what class did we do, the advisory or the genre blend readings? Is that the 514? I
That
think.
sounds like
Yeah.
514.
Yeah. And I like to take different elements, and put them in different places. And I'm like, you know what, marketers, you figure it out, or whatever. It's just the story that I wanted to tell. With that said, I'm sitting in a basement of a small little house, so it's maybe if I stuck to a certain genre and really cranked it, I would, maybe be more commercially successful. I don't know. So maybe, just take my experience, not necessarily what you should do, if that makes sense.
Let me pull another one out of the chat here.
There are great questions.
There really are some great questions in here. How do you stop the constant revising when reading through the story to check constantly if the events I'd written make sense or fit in place in the story?
That one to me goes back to almost the imposter syndrome, like it's that same voice in my head that is kind of doing those, like going back and reading the previous stuff, make sure it's absolutely perfect when it's never really going to be perfect, especially in the first or second draft. I kind of have a rule that in a first draft, I just don't edit really, like where I end, maybe I'll start the next morning, look at my computer, read the paragraph before, get it in my head and go. There's plenty of time for revision, for fresh eyes on it. My job as an author, as a writer, that first time to get down and try to capture the momentum and the joy and the spark or whatever it is inside of me that is making me write this particular story or novel. And the more I edit that, again, just me personally, on the first draft, the more muddled it becomes and the less excitement I feel about it. What do you guys do with that?
That was really beautifully put. Yeah, I mean, I do edit a little bit as I write, but I only go back a certain amount, like when I start every day, I'll go back maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 paragraphs. And just like you said, to kind of recenter my head and build a little momentum, for the rest of the writing day. But I'm not, and I'll make some changes in there as seems necessary to me, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time, like if I have a change in my understanding of a character or some new plot idea, I won't go back and revise everything. I'll just kind of make a note to myself that these are things that must be done on the next draft. And then I'll just press forward, because I agree with you. I think that momentum is really important to maintain.
Sorry, I'm typing to somebody.
Oh, okay. Gosh, there's so many great craft questions. I want to talk. I'm going to ask one more, and then I want to talk a little bit about teaching. But so here's a great question. How do you know if you've given one of the secrets of the main character too soon?
That's tricky. And it might be with that, I didn't know. For my second novel, it was really the only one that kind of had like a reveal or, like some sort of mystery involved. And I didn't know if things were coming through or too heavy-handed or if I dropped, too much knowledge too soon. I did not have that skill set to, discern that for myself. And that had to come from secondary readers. And again, this is way before agents or anyone. This is, you know, my father-in-law is actually my first reader, which is weird. But he's a really good first reader. And then, a couple buddies from grad school. And, that was a question that I asked. I think I had a professor always talk about rate of revelation, like at what point are you unfolding the story, revealing new things about a character or the plot or whatever. And that essentially can work very similar to just, kind of a classic, sorry, I had a text there, plot diagram, kind of like the hero's journey. It can be very similar of trying to achieve a goal and coming across more resistance as, you kind of think of any kind of hero type story. Rate of revelation can kind of do that same thing. If you feel like the pace is kind of dragging and, you want to reveal something or, drop a crumb to help with the mystery, go ahead and do it and, be sparing of those and kind of plot them so they get more and more toward the climax. And that helped a lot with that second novel where I was struggling with that.
I've found I've had a couple of books that do hinge on revelations, and one thing I found, which was kind of surprising to me, was the more my book hinged on a revelation, the more the plot hinged on a revelation, the more I was boxing myself into a corner. And a lot of times I discovered that what I thought was the revelation that needed to be withheld did not need to be withheld. And it was better to reveal it early.
Interesting.
And hold it back. And that opened the book up. And suddenly I was out of the corner and free to discover what the book was really about.
I love that.
I'm not going to say that works all the time.
But it's almost like using your little, trick or twist, what you think is the most important thing, laying it on the table and boom, it would be freeing in a lot of ways. I like that.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure you can both agree with or relate to this. I mean, I always try to keep a number of cards up my sleeve, right? Because I don't know exactly what's going to happen later in the book. I want to be able to pull some of them out or have the option to do that. And, maybe they'll save my butt and maybe they'll just be a red herring. But it doesn't matter. Either way, they can be effective. So we're kind of getting close to the end, and I want to circle back to the topic of teaching, because I don't know about you guys, but I never wanted to be a teacher. I never thought I didn't have any enjoyment in it. I never thought I would have any fulfillment in it.
Melissa's
I thought it would be a drag. But in fact, it's been the exact opposite. And I found it to be incredibly stimulating and rewarding and fulfilling. It's helped me grow as a writer in ways that I had never expected. So I wanted to ask you both about that, your experiences as teachers, because I also know a lot of people in the MFA program are teachers now or have a goal of being a teacher of creative writing at some point in the future.
You want to jump in? I keep going first, Melissa. Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
When I was just starting out, when I was about to go to university, I don't know, the principal of my high school recommended me for this big scholarship in California where I would get college fully paid for if I agreed to teach 2 years for every year that this organization funded me. Peter knows what I'm talking about. I got the award letter before my dad could see it. I ripped it up and threw it. And he said, so how about that award? And I said, I didn't get it. got him to pay for one term at UC Santa Cruz, and then that award letter came to him. And he said, "You got to do it. Sorry, you got to do it." I was like, teaching. Oh, this is awful, but I love it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Absolutely love it.
Yeah. That, oh my God, I'm just thinking about if my kids did that, because,
It's awful.
at that point, college will be like $1 million a semester. And like, kind of like both of you have said, like, teaching was never really on my mind, like I was going to become, the next whatever, um, best-selling author. So it almost was like an fallback or accident. And it, aside from like children, has been the biggest blessing in my life, and I don't mean blessing in a religious context or a connotation, but like more days than not, I am so incredibly grateful that I get to spend my time with other brilliant minds talking about, here fiction and nerding out about the things that really excite us, trying to make people's dreams come true, or, if it's just composition, with whatever, the same kind of thing, maybe just on a lesser scale, like learning, teaching, and trying to communicate and trying to make sense of things and trying to effectively express our opinions, and just the vibrancy and energy I get from that, like I said, like, and it sounds corny, is an absolute blessing and a complete shock. And literally, like, the end of the summer, like, I don't have a class for a week. Like, my wife's like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "I miss it." Like, I miss teaching. Like, I miss being there and nerding out about things and just having fun with the students. So all of you who are on the fence about, if you want to pursue teaching, give it a whirl, because it has been an absolute game changer for me.
Yeah.
And how has it changed you as a writer, do you think?
I think it's kept me young in a way that I didn't necessarily think would happen. Like, I think, especially like, when I get to see students, like, it just, or no, not, I will strike that, like, just interacting in a discussion forums or in person, the youth and the, not even, not youth, but the excitement, and like, it just invigorates me to an extent that no other job has even come close, not even sitting there writing on my own, it gets lonely. So I think that has been huge. And then, I mean, just everything, like, every time I'm teaching a class here, like, like all of us, I'll redo the reading and stuff. And it's like I'm reading the text for the first time, because it's like, a couple months off, it's like I will notice a new detail and be like, "Ooh, that is an amazing idea. Why have I never noticed that?" And so it's like constantly working on my craft, working on my reading, working on my character development or POV or whatever. And I don't think I would, well, I know I wouldn't get that anywhere else, any other profession,
Yeah, it really is like, you are the instructor, but you're also kind of a student, right? You're in a master class.
Yeah.
That's been my experience as well.
Yeah.
Folks, that pretty much brings us to the end of our night. I want to thank Melissa. I want to thank Peter so much for joining me tonight. This has been wonderful. Wish you both a great end to the summer. And we'll see you next month, I hope, for another Wireside Chat. Till then, good night.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.